Check one, two, three. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. My guest today is a location sound recordist and local audio engineer who has mixed and recorded a variety of shows, episodes, and broadcasts, and is based in Los Angeles, California. Please welcome Benjamin Quiles.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, Benjamin. All right, when you're working as a location sound recordist, what's in your audio kit? So tell us about your mics, your mixer, power distro, and everything in between.
Absolutely. So I mix on the Zoom F8 recorder. I actually have the original model. I love the thing. It's been a workhorse, and I've had it for maybe a year and a half now, and every time I use it, I learn about a new feature on it that is incredible and instrumental to what I am doing on my show. Most recently, I did a documentary where it was a hybrid of location shooting and interview style, and I was able to set it up with my F controller as well as the iPad app. It's very similar to Wingman for those of you that are familiar with sound devices, and it was incredible. I was able to watch my meters on my big old screen. I was able to mix physically with my faders, but that's the heart of my kit. I also run off of, right now I have Sennheiser G3s, running off of COS-11ds. I think that they're amazing mics. They have great balance and they're super small. They can conceal so easily. And my battery, I run off of the NP1s. Just, they last forever. And I've noticed that, especially with the F8 barely has a power draw on that thing. I'll be unlucky if I drain an NP1 after a full day of shooting with 2 G3s and my F8 drawing from that NP1.
Okay. What kind of shotgun mic do you like to use?
I have a pair of 416s. I have one as a backup, and I have a second that I bought, and I actually bought them both as T-Power. But I sent them over to this gentleman in Texas. I forget his name now, but he does this T to Phantom conversion, and sent it back, and it sounds identical. You can't tell.
How did you get started growing up learning about sound?
I started mixing when I was 13. And the beginning of my experience was working off of analog soundboards, specifically the Yamaha 3214. And we had full-on musicals of like 16 principal cast members working off of Shure lavaliers. And that's where I cut my teeth in learning how to hide lavs and still pick up well, learning my gain staging and all of that. In high school, man, I don't know if you had this experience, but for me, a lot of people in Florida were like, you know, that's not a real job, or that's going to be really hard. That's not going to make a whole lot of money. You should look to be like a doctor or a lawyer or something real, you know? And I was like, man, I can't see me working behind a desk for the rest of my life. I really love doing this. I really love the art side of it. And around that time, like, I was losing interest in wanting to be a musician because it was just really competitive, and I didn't like the competition. I didn't like the arrogance. I liked being behind the board because I felt like I was being artistic, but I was also engineering, you know? It was really cool. So I found out that in Orlando they offered classes for people that wanted to do film and television, which is something I was interested in and I didn't have an opportunity to do in high school. So I was like, cool. I looked into a school called Valencia, and I moved to Orlando, and we did a number of theater shows there as well. I never got to get into their film program, although I still hear it's absolutely amazing. But I really excelled in school. I already had previous years of experience from my productions. I had done carpentry and such before in high school as well, because they wanted to make sure that we were well-rounded and knew a little bit of all the departments. So I did pretty well in there, but I never got to finish because I had gotten to know a few friends in the industry. A lot of people moved to Orlando, ended up working like for costume characters and stuff for like Disney and Universal, and through that I got to know some of the managers in those spaces. And One of them started dating my best friend, and she and he moved out to Los Angeles. He got a job with a touring company out here that had another tour that needed a production manager. He offered me the job, and I took it. And yeah, crazy, right? Not even graduated college yet. Here I am managing a tour, going across the country, cities I'd never been in, because like for the majority of my life, I just knew Florida. And here I am, a Pacific Islander now in Canada and Boston, like during the winter, trying to figure out how to get road cases off of trucks without them slipping the ice, you know? So it was kind of a crash course into getting into the professional world, but I did that for about 2.5 years and decided, you know, the company was based out of Los Angeles, and we'd fly in and out of Los Angeles every Tuesday and Thursday. So on Wednesdays, they wanted us in the shop to prep and to be there to talk about whatever's going to go on the next week. So at that point, I'd already moved to LA, and I'd gotten out of those tours, and I needed to figure out what was next. So I actually hung lights for the next 1.5 years after that, until I can convince somebody to let me get behind a board and do some audio out here. And the interesting transition was that like I had paused my audio career around when they started switching to digital boards from analog, when digital really, really boomed. And there was a good like 6 years maybe that I hadn't been mixing. So when I returned to it, all of a sudden everything is digital, and now like everything that was in my rack is now in my board. And it was again another crash course in getting into all of this, but over time I got really lucky, and I started working for a company called 3G out here that I didn't know who they were, you know, and they turned out being one of the largest concert providers for audio systems, doing things like the Insomniac events like EDC, and I learned so much from them. But the buddies that I had met on tour, the people that I'd spent most of my time with, were video engineers, and I really like brotherly loved these guys, you know, and I wanted to work with them some more. So we got to talking while we were out here, and I was like, I'd be very interested in learning how to do, you know, location sound and sound for broadcast as well. And they both turned to me and were like, dude, that job is in high demand, and you can make a lot of money doing that. I strongly recommend you do it. And so I was convinced. And I already loved doing sound as was, so I put together a lot of my money I saved over about 1.5 years, 2 years, and I spent thousands of dollars on building a location kit, and now here I am. Like, I love it. The thing I love about location so much is that it still feels very new compared to like live. I feel like live is systematic at this point. We know how to build a sound system. We know it's a mixer to amplifiers to a sound system. With our personal kits, with our location kits, it's very personal. This is what my workflow is. It may not be your workflow, but it's mine. These are the accessories I find help me best in being successful in what I'm doing and what I'm mixing and how I want to record and put together my show. You know, you may use this kind of time code device. I like mine. It helps me, you know, put my metadata together better. It just makes more sense to me, you know? It's really cool.
Well, what are some of the recent projects that you've done recording them for location sound?
I just did a really cool documentary project with Edgar Wright, filming a documentary about a band called the Sparks, who were very big in the 80s, but I honestly, to be honest with you, I've never heard of them. They have a very niche fan base. It's sort of like, you know how like Firefly is like a cult classic now? They're like the Firefly of the 80s music world, and their music is fantastic, and it's been really cool like spending the couple weeks with them that I did, but I went into it not knowing who they were, but knowing who Edgar was. Like, my girlfriend and I were joking about it because like the week before we had just gone to see Scott Pilgrim like as a midnight movie, and now here I'm working with the director, and I'm like, oh God. And he was really cool and really nice and totally a nerd, and that was great for me because I'm totally a nerd. So like I loved it. It was great.
Well, what was the miking setup you kind of did on set?
That was definitely a learning experience for me. I use the COS-11s as much as possible. I just recently figured out, I don't know why I just figured it out, but one of my tom mics I have for drums is actually a 3.5 millimeter locking connector that connects to a preamp. I thought it was just one unit. So after taking those together, I was like, this is great. And I was able to connect my lav directly to XLR to go directly to my board. So I was able to do that instead of needing to use wireless. I had a wireless lav, my wired lav, and of course a shotgun for backup, and then they requested as well a floor mic to mic up the interviewer, and then time code. They had 3 cameras, and I was afraid I was going to have to get tentacle syncs for each camera plus my mixer. But my video buddies are like, well, we have a DA. You want to just use that? And of course, the timeout on the F8 mixer is BNC. So it was BNC out to the DA, and then the DA had 4 outputs, which I was able to send straight to the cameras. And it worked out perfect.
Oh, nice. Recently, I was doing a little short film project, and I didn't have enough tentacle sync boxes, so we split one. We had a Y cable come out of one of the tentacle sync, and I sent one to the camera and then one to a digital slate. We just wired the digital slate, so it worked out pretty good, though.
Man, I really want a digital slate. I really do. That's probably going to be one of my next purchases. I think it's just super useful to have that visually as well.
Makes a big difference. You also worked on a series called the Well Fed series. Tell me about that.
A few director buddies that I've worked with out here, directors and producers, they had this idea for this web series, and I had just recently heard about it, but they asked me, hey, you've worked with us in the past on some great projects. We trust you. Could you do this? And I was like, absolutely. And I had done scripted before, but it's such a different energy when you do it with people that you like, you know? So it was really, really fun being on set and doing that. It was with these 2 girls, Emily and Dana, and they were, this thing was their brainchild. It was their baby. But of course, they go through all these different costume changes and stuff, and that's kind of what drove me at this point to be like, okay, I need to buy some waist straps. Like you try to avoid the new gear until you absolutely need it, and you're like, just all right, I need it. But man, I'm really glad I have them now because they're super useful.
Well, what was the show about?
It's a comedy series. Right now, we just filmed the pilot about 2 girls living in Los Angeles, and the joke is that every single scene they're always eating, no matter what they're doing. They're a comedy duo that are just making jokes about everyday life. It's just a huge joke series, and it's going to be really fun, and hopefully it gets greenlit past the pilot.
Now, you've done some work with Deity microphones, so you did was it a live tutorial video with them?
Yes. I did a tutorial on how to hide a mic. I showed off and showcased a few of the methods that I've used that have been very successful in the past, especially when miking female talent in more challenging clothing, as well as male talent, whether they be, some of us are hairy. And then sometimes, the clothing that we wear tends to be thinner for like athletic wear, so you need to figure out how to conceal that a little bit better. It's not as easy to hide,
Exactly. And we'll tell some tips on hiding mics.
My biggest advice, and I think that Andrew will agree, Andrew from Deity, the lav sandwich it's such a universal way to stick a mic to anything. But one of my favorite, honestly, that I didn't get to do for the video, what I have here is medical tape going around the microphone head itself, just below the element itself, taped to a safety pin. And then the safety pin, what I do with that is it's very similar to a vampire clip, except that I can lock it shut. So what happens is it moves with the clothing, and it's a very good way to avoid clothing rustling because it's on the fabric itself.
Okay. I've actually seen something similar, but with moleskin. We do the same thing where you wrap moleskin around the mic, and then you kind of slip a safety pin in there, too. But that's great.
Cool.
That works good, too. Now, you've done some other projects with Deity?
Yes. We just recently went to NAB, where they showcased their new Deity Connect system, the wireless transmitter and receiver set, which has been making waves in the location sound community. They have incredible range. They have incredible sound. Andrew's been doing a really great job of trying to target 2 different demographics at once. He's strongly targeting the live streamer market very heavily, and that was the idea behind the D3 Pros, the little shotgun mics that have the smart chip on them that can detect whatever they're plugged into, whether you plug it into a phone and unplug that and plug it into a DSLR. But he's doing the same with the Deity Connect series. The smart thing about those is that, first off, it's a set of 2 transmitters that communicate to a receiver both ways over 2.4. But a few things that he's doing with that are stronger than the AVX series, say, from Sennheiser, which are very popular right now, is he's been very specific with even the antenna design to make sure that it picks up a little bit more signal strength than like the AVX series is doing right now. And also with the two-way communication, you're able to change your gain staging settings from your receiver, and it goes right to the transmitter without having to go into your talent's clothing. It's just really intelligent design. As well, because he's also targeting like one-man bands like wedding photographers and such, the transmitters actually have I believe it's 1/4-inch screw jack on them, so that you can screw it onto the bottom of a DSLR and it can travel with you. Things like that.
Okay. Now, you also taught a course for audio for live broadcasts. So for some of our listeners who've never done a live broadcast, kind of throw down a little bit of, what's your setup for, say, an average situation?
Absolutely. First off, I want to give a big shout out to 4K Media Live. That's the company that I'm working with for that class. It's an audio class for a video engineering course. Just to be clear, it itself is not an audio engineering class. It exists to help people that are studying to be video engineers to know how to troubleshoot. However, I do go a little bit more in depth because I'm a sound guy. I love talking about this. And so some things that I brought along in my setup for this class, what I use for broadcasts is I myself own an X32. I think the X32 it's a really interesting board because a lot of people will talk about it, but a lot of people will give negative feedback to it. And I think that that's aimed in the wrong direction. Yes, we have boards that have better processing, but for the price point of the X32, it does some amazing processing. I talk about in my class, I found a nice signal flow chart for a channel strip that I use, and I talk about how, for me, I don't like using the term gain. Apparently in the EU, they, instead of calling it gain, they call it head amp control, which makes more sense to me because that's what you're doing, is you're controlling your head amp. If you're mixing your show on a digital mixer, but you're also using it as an interface, then that gain control also adjusts the gain that's going into your DAW, So I think it makes more sense that way. As well as just a brief outline of compression and the importance of that, because we need to stay around -6 to -12 on our signal. Whenever we're doing broadcasts or anything, we need to keep that volume level pretty consistent, but as human beings, we're very dynamic speakers as well. So sometimes it goes above that. Sometimes, we get really excited and we talk very loudly, and then we go back to, normal speaking voices that can be kind of quiet. So that's where a compressor can come in and hush down my peaks, but with my makeup gain, bring up my quieter points and give me more consistent volume level across my broadcast. And then a big important part about the X32's compression, I think that people don't know, is that not only can I compress my entire input, but it actually has a filter control on there to where I can compress specific frequencies if I want on either that channel or that bus or what have you. And so if I have a speaker that I know is boomy, I can put a low pass filter only on my compressor and just compress that low end. Or if he's too tinny or too SE&T, I could do the same thing with a high pass filter and just compress that high end, And I think that that's really important that some people don't know about that board. As well, side chaining. Side chaining is a really important thing, especially when you're doing concerts or anything with an audience, that I think more engineers should be talking about, where you put a compressor on your audience and you have that compressor listen not to that audience track, but to, say, like a bus where you put all of your speakers, all your talking heads on. So anytime your talking heads are speaking, it compresses the volume from your audience so that you can hear them better. I tried to keep it simple because it's specifically for video engineers to troubleshoot, but I also wanted to put in ideas like that just to kind of also give shine a little light on what we're doing, because sometimes the video guys think that we just sit there and push some buttons and look at some lights,
That is true. I saw that you were in Kuwait last year. So what were you working on there?
I worked for a really cool company called Illuminate for a while. They are a dance company, and what it is the best way I can describe it is most people are most familiar with them when they were on America's Got Talent in the earlier 2000s. And they were that dance group that they turned off all the lights in the theater and the stage, and these dancers came out with these light up suits and made different shapes and different actions and made them look like they were flying and things just from like lights on their suits that had different cues. So for the most part, they're outlines of arms and legs and faces and stuff. And through that, they're able to illuminate different parts of their bodies to make different visual effects. Like they have one that I really like where if there's one person in the front, they completely light him up, and then like 4 people in the back put their arms out and they call it the Doc Oct because it looks like he has like 8 arms. It's cool. It's very cool. But they got very popular from that, and especially in other parts of the world. And we were able to go to Kuwait with this show, and we spent a week there going city to city on a little tour just performing for them. And we actually got that one from a more interesting trip. A year prior to that, we were in Saudi Arabia for a month. And that was very interesting. Saudi Arabia at the time, I don't know if this is still current, but they had a project called Vision 2030 to where they wanted to step away from oil being their main source of income and make it more arts. So they were inviting shows like us out to perform for everybody. So we got to take a very, very, very rare tour of Saudi Arabia and see what it's like out there. So my favorite part about that trip specifically was that we got a chance to, on one of our days off, we were in this really desert part of Saudi, and we're driving to the next city, and they wanted to do something fun for us. So they took us to this little, I guess, park would be the way to describe that. It was just sand dunes forever. It looked like Borderlands. And then all of a sudden, there's just this little Mad Max looking park where these guys own, they had a couple camels, but they had a lot of 4-wheelers. So we got to 4-wheel down the sand dunes of Saudi Arabia for a full day. That was so cool.
I saw that you were recently an RF coordinator at the Hollywood Bowl. So first off, kind of tell the listeners what an RF coordinator does and what's a prep day and what's a show day like.
I'm assuming, because this is a Location Sound podcast, that you guys mostly have Location Sound listeners. And I need to just clarify that it is very different than live. On this show at the Hollywood Bowl, we had to mic up a full chorus that needed to come in and out and do costume changes, as well as a full principal cast. And for the principal cast, each person gets their own mic and wireless in-ears that is specific to them. So they need to have their own specific EQ controls that make them sound right. So altogether, we ended up with about 100 wireless devices across not just our stage, but in the audience as well, which was huge for me. And before I go into detail about that, an RF coordinator is the person that is scanning the airwaves to see what pockets we can put our wireless transmitters into as far as frequencies. Because just like we have the audible frequency spectrum, we also have the RF electromagnetic spectrum that we can work in for wireless. It's just like how FM radio works, but just at much higher frequency levels. And a huge challenge here in Los Angeles especially is that we have so many things that are using these pockets of the spectrum now. They're called TV channels, and they're chunks of, I'd say probably like, if my spectrum is 480 to 960 megahertz, then we have people that are taking up like from 600 to 800 megahertz now that is illegal for us to operate on. And we have people that are taking chunks that are like maybe like 500 to 520. I would say you can't call frequencies like 20 frequencies. That's not how that works. But like that pocket, it's chunks of like from 500 to 520 and chunks like that across the spectrum that are just, you're not allowed to go there, or that somebody nearby you is using that. And with wireless mics, you get what's called harmonics. When you have 2 wireless mics that are next to each other, they cause harmonics and intermodulation, which causes huge issues in your receiving because your receiver is listening at this frequency. And then if your 2 transmitters start talking near that frequency and start creating a harmonic that hits right on the frequency that your receiver is listening to, now you have all kinds of crazy things that are going to come through that aren't your signal source that you want to be listening to. So if that can happen with just 2 mics on next to each other, imagine 100. So that's what an RF guy does. We're lucky enough to have software from Shure called Wireless Workbench, where we are able to visually see all of this. We're able to scan the airwaves actively with our receivers as long as they're Shure branded. They communicate with Wireless Workbench perfectly, and Wireless Workbench can actually go into your unit and change your controls and stuff if you'd like, but it can also scan the airwaves actively through those receivers and show you what's going on and show you what the noise is like out there. And so we use these tools to kind of just monitor what's going on and make sure that our battery levels are fine, that everybody's mics are set up and where they need to be on their mouths, because as an RF guy, you still need to worry about pickup patterns and things like the proximity effect on these lavaliers that, their diaphragms are super tiny. So they get the proximity effect a lot more than, say, the RE20 that you're using right now. But it's a pretty big job, and it's a pretty stressful job because sometimes you don't have control of it. A big thing that anybody that's worked in a recording in a convention or what have you knows is that a lot of these local guys, location guys, will scan for their own frequencies, but they don't know about anybody else around them. So, if you have to, if you're like me and I have like all these frequencies that are on my system, and then I have a location sound guy who's scanned his frequencies maybe like down the road from me and they were clean there, they could be stepping on me now, I could be stepping on him. So it's really important that we're constantly monitoring our frequencies so that our main talent on stage doesn't all of a sudden cut out or get crazy static, and then we risk the show, we risk the sound system. It's crazy. And everybody's on more and more demand for wireless mics lately, because the big thing in live is if it's new technology and it could do a thing, I want it to do that thing. So.
Okay. Now, on the actual day of the event, everything looks good, and then right before the show, you start seeing other frequencies pop up. What do you do?
This happens all the time. A good RF coordinator will... First off, a good RF coordinator knows that you can't coordinate in the shop and expect that to work on location. Every day, as soon as you show up, you will do a scan, and you'll see what the spectrum looks like, and then you'll go into something like Wireless Workbench that calculates your frequencies for you, which is really great. It already goes, okay, if this frequency is here, then if it's going to spit out harmonics, they're going to be here and here. And it calculates that per device. And it already knows. Wireless Workbench has most popular brands preloaded into its software already and knows what its frequency bands are and all of that stuff. So Wireless Workbench automatically calculates that out for you for all of your devices and analyzes them too, and analyzes them against, there's a portion of it where you can tell it, okay, this is my zip code. This is the zip code that I'm in currently. And Wireless Workbench goes, cool. These are the TV channels that we know are around. So we're going to make sure that we don't put any of your frequencies there. And then also it'll look at the scan that you just did, and it'll look for peaks in that scan and say, okay, we're discluding this frequency specifically and the harmonics around it. So daily you'll go in, you'll do your first scan, and then you'll coordinate all your wireless to that. And then throughout the day as you're going by, you'll keep doing scans and monitoring the spectrum and seeing if somebody turns something on nearby you just randomly or what have you. Or a big one that I learned recently, a friend of mine started working for Claire, and he's been working with Katy Perry and Paul Simon and Kanye, and he just recently did Kanye's gospel service at Coachella, where they had even more wireless than I was working with. And he told me the most important thing about RF you need to consider is all these people that do have RF around you will turn it up even higher at night, because that's when everybody's home from work, and so that's when people are watching TV. So you need to do another scan around 6 p.m. no matter what, because everything's gonna be worse at that time. It's just constantly scanning and monitoring the system and having at least one backup. I usually do a backup handheld, so if a lav goes down or anything goes down, I could just hand somebody a stick and they could sing right into it, and my mixers have an input, But that's a typical day for an RF guy.
It sounds relaxing.
Exactly. I always joke that, like for me, for the A2, I set it up and then I can relax the rest of the time. The RF is just always pulling their hair out.
Yeah, and live events, you got one chance to get it right, and so those can be nerve-wracking. Yeah. I did a live event recently, and we were streaming live, and then it was going live to another stage, and we had fiber optics coming in and mix minuses going out, and it had been a while since I'd done some live like that, so it was nerve-wracking for sure.
Yes, and I attribute all of my sanity and calmness on broadcast and location to just the hectic situations I've lived through in live my whole life since I was 13, since I was figuring out how these things worked and pulling my hair out, just not knowing how wireless devices worked until I learned it. And now doing broadcasts for some of these bigger guys. That's actually how I won the contract with EDC. Is I worked for the same company prior to that. Comic-Con that year wanted to do a live broadcast. They were trying to create a streaming service that year as well through Lionsgate, and they hired this company Carino to come out and do their live broadcast. And one of my buddies I'd work with on the tour got me onto that. And things started going down. And things just started happening. When they started happening, instead of panicking, freaking out, which apparently their past A2 guy did, I just was like, okay, cool. And I just calmly walked up to whatever it was, changed the frequency, and then kept the show going. And they loved me, apparently. And then that's how I got EDC. At EDC, my favorite story about EDC, we have the live company out at the stages actually mixing the shows. And each company has their mixers and their input-output racks. And from then, we've gone and discussed, hey, we need to get a live feed from each of you. Cool, great, we've got this happening. And everything's working for the majority of the event. And then this specific year at the specific stage, the main stage, Tiesto, who, for those of you that don't know, he's a very, very big DJ in the EDM world, gets onto the stage, and his crew comes on, and they decide that they brought their own mixer. So they decide that they're going to be working with their own stuff and their own input-output rack. And so the company that was doing the live stuff for them, they bypassed their input-output rack and went straight into the amplifiers with their system, which means now the output that we had set up for the broadcast from their system is bypassed completely. So we don't know that. We don't know know any of this because we're miles away at HQ, and all of a sudden we have video, but we have no sound. And suits start coming over, just breathing down our necks, being like, contract. So I have to run out there, and I'm trying to figure it out. Meanwhile, my A1 is being pressured, and he's just like panicking over the radio, what's going on? And I'm like, dude, just give me a second. I need to talk to people to figure it out. And I have to keep going from, there's just a miscommunication somewhere, so I have to keep talking to the backstage patch guy who sends me to the front of house pat guy. So I need to cross a sea of festival people to get to front of house and talk to them, and they say, no, it's not over here, it must be over there. So I go back there again, and then I talk to front of house, and finally they figured it out, and that it was that they bypassed us completely. And meanwhile, my front of house guy, who's just panicking because he doesn't know what to do, he's not been in this situation before, is like, you know what, never mind, I'm coming out there. And I go on the radio, I was like, no, you stay there and you look for signal, because as soon as this is going through, I need you to unmute it. I have this. And he just goes, okay, sits back down. And he told me, like, minutes later, they had repatched it and it was working. He was so ecstatic because apparently, as I said before, the guy he had before me was just somebody that had no clue. And it's difficult because honestly, like I said, location and broadcast is so different than live. If you don't know how these systems work, then, you're at a loss. You're talking to people about things that they're working with that you don't understand. But luckily I had that background, so I knew where to look. And for him to have that level of comfort and trust in his A2 was instrumental. And I think that was probably the most successful point in my career so far. Just proving that, yes, I can do this. Just give me a second.
Yeah. What's been your most favorite project you've worked on so far?
I got to say probably Comic-Con, the San Diego that I had mentioned earlier, just because there was such high energy. It was a new thing for me, but it was also they're now my best friends, but my video engineers from that original tour were on that project as well as guys that they had really enjoyed working with. So everybody on that entire team was so positive, and I'm talking about an entire broadcast team in this courtyard area where we're doing our main broadcast, plus run and gun guys that were just going all over the convention floor, getting footage of everybody and what they were doing in there and what they were showcasing and some talks and stuff. And just the workflow was just off the charts because everybody was friends. Everybody were real good friends. It was like being at a summer camp with video gear. It was so cool. There were nights that we were done with the show and we struck and we all got into the van together, and the van driver just knew us by name and started blasting 80s rock, and we're just singing Journey with the windows down and all these guys, and anime costumes and dinosaur suits are just scream singing with us, and it's just so high energy going back to the hotel, you know? And those are the best gigs. Those are the best. You gotta like the people that you work with. That's honestly what has kept me in events and arts, period, is so many good people.
That's good. That's good. All right. So what is your worst on-set experience?
I'm going to go with second worst just because I don't ever want to talk about the worst again. This past weekend, actually, I just did a wedding, a very high-profile wedding that, first off, I always know it's a red flag when they won't give you details, paperwork, plots, input list. They won't give you that stuff. I was given a schedule. It was down in San Diego. We had to drive down and meet at the shop that's in Fountain Valley. From that shop, drive down to San Diego. When we got there, at our scheduled time, the coordinator that was there told us we were 2 hours late, which is not what was in the paperwork. And we found out that there were 3 areas that we had to build sound systems for that they told us were adjacent rooms, which were absolutely not at all. They were across this country club, basically, on very, very, very different spots. What should have been a crew of 6 was a crew of 2 and the owner. And it was a very difficult job to chew up and process and try to do. We got there at 11, and we needed to be show ready by 4:30, with 3 different sound systems in 3 very different locations. So it was really tough. It was really tough because, first off, the difficulty with doing like corporate events and weddings and stuff like that, personal events, I would say, is that the coordinators for personal events are so consumed and worried and satisfying the client, and as well as like the aspect of how it looks, not just how the set looks, but how everything looks, because their client is going to be in every space, period. So the whole thing needs to look beautiful. So they're much more worried about cosmetics than they are about how the electronics are working. And so they tend to talk down to engineers. They don't know the level of what it is we're doing, the magnitude of it. So, here we are being yelled at for being 2 hours late, which we weren't, being talked down to the entire time and needing to make a show work, all in suits and outdoors. So it was probably the most I've sweat in the past couple years. It was the most stressed I've ever been for 4 faders. It was bad, man. It was the complete opposite San Diego, It's just how the energy of your show is. It can either be positive or not. And when it's not, it's really hard to keep your head in the game and say, okay, I'm going to finish this. And luckily enough, like, I know I have the attitude to go ahead and just be like, this is the show and it needs to happen. But, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you end up with crew members that aren't that. And luckily I had that on this show. Enough so that we are all stressed, but we all understood each other's level of stress and supported each other as much as we could, to a point where, luckily, the event wasn't all 3 rooms at the same time. They would be in one place, the commencement, and after the commencement, they go to the reception, and after the reception, they go to the after party. I mixed the commencement, and after the commencement, we went to the reception hall, and I was like, I need to de-stress for a bit. I'm going to go strike this other room. And they were like, dude, totally understand. And same when we got to the after party, I was like, I had to go in there and set up the mix and set everything up. But at a certain point, I was like, guys, can you take over this board? I don't want to mix the show anymore. I'd rather go strike that other thing and just be in silence. And they're like, yeah, we totally understand, dude, go. So, I mean, some positive comes from negative.
Yeah. Well, if some of our listeners wanted to get into more of like the live broadcast audio situation, what would you recommend that they do?
My 2 biggest pieces of advice would be download Wireless Workbench, because it is the most powerful audio tool you'll get for free. And just learn how it works. 2 is get onto the Facebook communities. Especially if you're here in Los Angeles, just about every department of sound has a Facebook group for it. I'm part of the Audio Engineering Society Facebook group. I'm part of the Location Sound Mixers group. I'm part of the live events groups here. And they're just, you can ask any question and somebody will have your back. All of our gear is crazy. And so, one of my biggest parts of my class, I was talking about how we have so many different names for things. Like a high pass filter is also called a low cut filter, or like how fader flip is also called sends on fader. Pre-fade listening is also called solo. And sometimes the terminology is not universal, so it's good to just talk to other engineers who may have experienced this, and somebody can get back to you and say, hey man, this is what it does. So definitely join the Facebook groups, talk to us. Most of us love talking about this so much. I've been doing it for over an hour now in this podcast, and I still have so much to say, we love it. And then my third piece of advice is one that comes from a video engineer buddy that I met back in Carino. His name is Sven, and Sven used to always say, always read the manual. Don't ever trust the manual. The manual will tell you how things work, okay? The manual will give you instructions on at least what the terminology of the piece of equipment is. However, all of this equipment's going to do something crazy or wacky. It's just going to, and the best thing that you can do is just be used to it.
Well, Benjamin, as we kind of start to wrap things up, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
I'm mostly available on social media, Facebook or Instagram. My Instagram tag is Kodiak Audio, as well as Facebook. You can just look me up, Benjamin Quiles. I definitely accept friend requests. You can find me on most of the forums that I was just discussing, the Facebook groups. Ask me any question. I'm totally open to advising however I can.
All right, great. Well, I want to say thanks to Benjamin Quiles for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And a big thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like us to discuss a particular topic, please send us an email at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to subscribe and leave us a comment. We're available on Apple Podcasts, and for Android users, check out Google Podcasts. Also, we're on Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.